Hello, salutations, what it do? It's Dr. Gamer back at you with another Marvel's Avengers video. It's been a while since I've done a build video, but I figured that I might as well do one because of the renewed interest in Iron Man due to his MCU skin finally dropping and being by far the most fire MCU skin we've gotten so far. I got a really good Iron Man build. I've been working on it for a little bit. I finally got some of the gear pieces I'm looking for, so the build performs really well. I showed it off on stream and you guys really liked it. So here it is. I was trying to make this earlier, but I was sick. But now I'm coming through and bringing you this Iron Man rocket build video. But before we get into it, make sure you smash that like button. It helps tremendously with the YouTube overlords. And make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a video. I'm trying to hit 2,000 subs by E3 next month, which is about June 12th. I know that we can do it. So without further ado, let's jump right into this build video. So Iron Man, as people who follow me on stream know, is not my favorite character. I don't typically enjoy using Iron Man, but he can be fun. I know a lot of people still like Iron Man, but my main problem is that I think Iron Man has a pretty big disadvantage compared to the other heroes, and I just generally don't enjoy his gameplay loop. But I did figure out a way with gear to kind of mitigate his biggest flaw and make him a lot more playable. So if you guys have been struggling with your Iron Man, you want to do a range Iron Man, but you've been having trouble, this build should help you out a ton. So I'm going to go over the skills, then go over the gear, then show you some gameplay. You know how it is. So first we'll go to the skills here, and this build is going to be focused on the rockets because they are by far the most powerful. The other ability I will be using sometimes is the lasers. Usually when I'm on the ground, usually I'm flying and shooting rockets, but when I'm not, I'm using the laser. Repulsors or trash, don't bother. But the main problem with Iron Man is that his intrinsic is tied to all of his moves except for his melee. As you see, he has very few melee moves and they are light attacks. They don't cost intrinsic, they build intrinsic, but he's a ranged character, but all of his range attacks cost intrinsic. So you have to be really careful usually with how you use these abilities because you're going to run out of intrinsic and not be able to do anything with punch. So it kind of forces you into melee range typically, unlike say Hawkeye. If you want to do a pure range Hawkeye build, you can just sit back, press triangle, do whatever, shoot off. You can do the same thing with Black Widow, just aim, shoot from a distance, no problem, all good. But with Iron Man, for some reason, they put all of his abilities to his intrinsic meter, so you actually don't typically have that option to just sit back and shoot. But I did, like I said, figure out a way around that. So here's his skill breakdown. For the support, we got the arc field. Now, this will change depending on what you're doing, whether you're doing solo or doing group play. I usually play solo, so I use the arc field, but even when I'm playing with other players, I usually still use the arc field because I just think it's very useful. The arc field just creates this barrier, whether you're on the ground or in the air. And while you're inside, you're basically immune from all projectile damage, and you can just let it fly, spam your rockets, do whatever you want, and they can't do anything to you. And the defensive field just causes those projectiles to be reflected right back at them. So this is a very useful skill. In addition, it also overcharges you, which lets you spam your intrinsic abilities as much as you want, as well as give you increased damage. So very good ability. The alternative is the MP, which stuns everybody, but I feel like I typically get more bang for the buck when I am using the arc field. Over for the assault heroic, this is kind of up to you. I definitely recommend the energy condenser. Enemies defeated by the Unibeam will drop heroic orbs. Having heroics charged with this build is pretty useful. So whenever I have an opportunity to get heroic orbs, I will take it. I advise you to do the same. This one is personal preference. You can do the Omega Beam. I know a lot of people like it. I prefer the Precision Refractor, which increases the duration of the Unibeam by 3 seconds. And what you do is, so I'm on PlayStation, so the Assault Heroic is R1. So if you have this, if you hold R1 instead of just pressing it, he will actually hold the Unibeam for a long time, and you'll get a lot more use out of it. The Omega Beam is very powerful, but it's also very brief. So that's why I've been preferring the Precision Refractor and just going for the longer duration of the Unibeam rather than having just one strong blast that doesn't last that long. So I can just hold the Unibeam and just drag it across different enemies and generate a lot of heroic orbs that way. In general, I think his Assault Heroic needs to be reworked. The Unibeam isn't as strong as it should be, but this one I feel like is the best use of it. The other option is the Reserve Capacitors, which gives you 3 charges of the Unibeam, but you're trading off both power and duration. So instead of one huge beam or one really long beam, you're doing 3 really short beams that don't actually do anything. So I do not recommend that at all. For his ultimate heroic, I always go with the Magnum Missile Barrage. Magnum missiles target up to 8 enemies. This is the best thing you can do with your Hulkbuster. You equip the missiles, you let them fly, clear out the whole room. It's very fun. Also devastating to bosses, very powerful ability. So if I can up the amount of missiles, I would happily take that. The other option is doing a pulse or doing a Unibeam. I don't recommend either of those. The Magnum Missile is clearly his best move, and you should be using it as much as possible. Over here, the only option you should be picking is Energy Star, which reduces the intrinsic cost by 25% for all your attacks when you're using Hulkbuster. This is very important because when you use these attacks, especially the Missile Barrage, it drains your intrinsic, and once your intrinsic runs out, you will leave your Hulkbuster. So if you have the Energy Star active, what it does is allows you to use the Magnum Missile Barrage 3 times as opposed to 2. So that definitely does come in handy. I highly recommend doing that. Now, over on the Mastery tree, I have Stun Mastery, increase all stun damage to enemies by 15%. Your other options aren't really that great. You can increase the damage of combo finishers by 25%, but I don't really do combo finishers all that often. And I don't think having an increase to critical attack damage while juggling is all that relevant. I like the extra stun because, like I said, having his heroics is good. So if I can stun enemies more, then I can get takedowns, and takedowns generate orbs. And because I do use the lasers in close range combat, which already have naturally high stun abilities, this combined with that makes me have an easier time stunning enemies, especially when I'm using regular melee attacks. So having the ability to just do extra stun and get takedowns is very useful. Over here, Takedown Mastery, you already know you should have this on every one of your heroes. Enough said. Weapon Efficiency, a 15% reduction to intrinsic energy meter cost for all range attacks and weapons. You should have this checked off, no questions asked. As I said, Iron Man's attacks drain intrinsic with the exception of his melee, so you should be looking to reduce the intrinsic costs for all of these nodes if possible, because that's going to be crucial to Iron Man's abilities. Over here, now is where you can specialize, whether you want to focus on your repulsors or your lasers or your rockets. And each node on the tree gives you pretty much the same benefit, just with a different weapon for the most part. So the Rocket Mastery increased the damage for rockets by 12%. Adds target guidance system to basic aim rocket attacks, making it easier to target and take out enemies with precision. And of course, decrease the intrinsic cost for rockets by 10%. Depending on what you're specializing in, you want to have these all checked out. So if you're going to do lasers instead, then you could just do all of these. If you're doing repulsors, you could do all these, etc. I think rockets are, of course, the best of Iron Man's weapons, followed by the lasers. So I usually use the rockets, so that's why I have all of these checked off. Over on intrinsic ability, once again, focus on efficiency. Increases intrinsic energy gain from dealing damage with light attacks by 16% per hit. This does come up because, as I said, Iron Man will have occasions where he uses light attacks. This builds up intrinsic, and this will just allow you to gain more per hit. The alternative is you can increase the base regeneration speed of your intrinsic by 10%, or you can increase the amount of intrinsic supercharge by 50%, but I don't recommend that. I recommend either one of these. They are pretty much, I think, fairly equal in my opinion. Probably if you want to focus more on your range, which you can with this build that I have, you might want to just go with the base regeneration speed increase, but either one works just fine. Over here, stunning an enemy intrinsically boosts your intrinsic by 25 points. Like I said, we already have combat where we do extra stun. I use lasers as well, which does naturally stun. So you do stun pretty often, and this will give you a boost to your intrinsic on top of everything else. The rest aren't really that relevant and don't really matter much, though. You can go with this one to increase the duration of your overcharge by 2 seconds, but not as relevant since you're not overcharged like you used to be. Before, Iron Man used to have an exploit where if you make his energy shield, you can just do a parry inside of the energy shield and you would automatically gain back all your intrinsic and become overcharged. So the build for Iron Man used to be about basically abusing the overcharge, but they patched that, so you can choose either one of these, don't matter that much. And for the last one, increases damage for all attacks while overcharged by 12.5%. That works. These are basically all for your overcharge, so I prefer the increased damage over having damage reduction or heroic charge rate. Over utility, we got gain 15 points of intrinsic when parrying. We got regenerate 5% per second of intrinsic energy while you're near the energy barrier, and increase the damage from all range attacks while flying by 15%. Now these these aren't really particularly good, so you're basically just choosing between mediocre options here. If you want to do something for your teammates, if they're near the barrier, they gain 50% critical attack chance, so that could be relevant. Reflecting projectiles at the barrier isn't really that relevant. And you can reduce the cost of the energy shield activation by 50% if you want to, but honestly don't use the energy shield all that often, and my intrinsic energy is pretty efficient as it is. I used to use it, of course, a lot more when you could do the exploit, but now that you don't, it's not really an emphasis. So that's all for Iron Man skills. Now we're going to go over to the gear, and I'll show you how you can build your Iron Man to be doing a lot of damage and not burning through all of your intrinsic. So I don't have all of the gear that I want. After the update, you can get much higher stat rules, so I might look for exotics or something for Iron Man, but I have gotten some pretty decent drops. Like I said, this is a range focused build, so you want to be prioritizing stats of precision for your range damage, as well as resolve for your health, because you don't want to be too squishy. And also you might want to have a little bit of valor because it makes your heroic abilities stronger, and Iron Man does have pretty good heroic abilities. For the gear, we got the lightweight spark gauntlets. I only have this because of the stats and because of the armory flare. 116% increased critical attack damage from all weapons is very good, but the other perks are completely useless. If you can find precision and resolve with the armory flare, and you can find something that does affect damage on signature attacks like this piece. Signature attacks deal particle damage. That's useful if you have an opposite effect on your range gear piece. That can be useful. You can really do some damage if you use Iron Man's signature attack, which is when you hold square and do a dive bomb. I use this move a lot. It's very useful, and it's even more useful when you have status effects that you can apply to it, especially something like particle damage. I don't have a gear piece like it that is useful, but for my purposes, if you can find something that has that and has resolve and precision, definitely get that. This one I got recently after the new update. I would prefer precision over valor, but this is still a pretty good piece. The main thing you want to look at are the targeted empowerment and expert empowerment. Now, ideally, one of these would be a damage buff, because both of them together are pretty redundant. If you can find a piece with a targeted buff instead, that would be ideal. If you could get a targeted buff and expert empowerment, or vice versa, that would be great. But this pretty much doubles up the empowerment, and what it does is it gives you a 70% chance hitting an enemy with ranged crit, grants an intrinsic burst, and a 98.7% chance defeating an enemy with a ranged crit attack grants an intrinsic burst. So what happens is if you crit someone, whether you kill them or not, you get a burst of intrinsic energy, which boosts up your intrinsic meter significantly, so that you can essentially just keep spamming your rockets, keep using your lasers or what have you, without having to go into melee range and build up your intrinsic that way. So this allows you to hang back, be more safer with Iron Man, and just kind of hang out in the air if you want to, away from the fray, and just fire off your range attacks without having to worry about having to go in melee range to refill your intrinsic meter. This is an excellent replacement for the energy barrier exploit. I definitely suggest that if you're doing any kind of range Iron Man build, you get a gear piece with either targeted empowerment or expert empowerment. It will help you a lot. Now, I do switch. When I'm fighting a boss, I will switch to the targeted buff repulsor, because this gives me a damage buff, a 55% chance of one when I hit an enemy with a ranged crit, and it goes well with my major artifact. So if I'm fighting a boss, I like to use this, because damage at that point is much more important than maintaining my intrinsic meter. You want to basically just kill them as fast as possible. So using the targeted empowerment isn't nearly as relevant. So you can switch in between, but usually when I'm just dealing with hordes of different enemies, the targeted empowerment is the way to go. For the chest piece, this one doesn't matter. I literally just got it for the stats. Precision, resolve, that's all that's relevant. It has a really high stat roll. That's all that is relevant. If you have a better piece with similar or better stats, use that. But I literally just got this for the stats. Same thing with this heavyweight blessing reactor. I basically got it for the rampage buff, but valor is still relevant. If I could get more, if I get a better piece, I get an exotic or something with some precision, that would be ideal. but just having, because I know there are legendaries that drop high precision, valor, and resolve. So if you can get a better piece, that's fine, but you definitely would like a damage buff generator here, whether it is a berserker buff or a rampage buff, especially if you're using the targeted empowerment and you don't have any buffs on the range. You want to have a way to get damage buffs easily on your heroic piece, because it's going to combine well with your major artifact. Minor artifacts, again, really just got them for the stats. You just want precision. You want as much precision as possible. The perks don't matter. And the major artifact, as I was alluding to, is focused on damage. It is, of course, the Nornstone or Lethal Will. And you want that last perk that's most relevant against bosses. You pop it, get a damage buff. If you've already generated a damage buff with your rampage buff, or you switched to your targeted buff repulsors and you got a buff going, you can do a double damage buff, and you can do a ton more damage and just melt down bosses a lot faster. It's very powerful. Nornstone is pretty much the go-to for most builds. There aren't really that many major artifacts to choose from. Ideally, you're going to go for either the Nornstone or the Tactagon or the Ring. Those are pretty much the main artifacts that people use. For Iron Man, I think the Nornstone is better, but if you were trying to just focus on status damage, maybe you can consider the Tactagon, but for my purposes, I prefer the Nornstone of Lethal Will. So that is it. That is the Iron Man build. I'm going to leave you with some gameplay footage just showing Iron Man in action. It's pretty fun. Sometimes I maintain that I don't enjoy Iron Man compared to other heroes in this game, but I know a lot of people like it, and when you build him up right, Iron Man is significantly more fun to play. The better you gear him up, it just takes longer to get the gear right to make him play a lot more fun, but ideally Crystal Dynamics would definitely make some adjustments to his combat, most notably to tying less of his moves to his intrinsic meter. I think that would go a long way towards making Iron Man more playable. But thank you again for watching. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Also, if you want to support the channel, you can become a member today. You can get access to exclusive membership perks like custom badges, custom emotes, early access to videos, member exclusive content, as well as weekly gaming sessions with myself. It's a lot of fun. We got a bunch of people already signing up to be defenders, and it is a really fun and cheap way to support the channel. We were having a lot of fun with the emotes in the chat. I got some new emotes being worked on as we speak that I'm very excited about. That should be a lot of fun. So that's all. I'm still out the gamer, signing out.
Team is close by and on alert. Updating your HUD. Never keep it more here. I gotta be waiting. Don't these guys ever learn? Enemies engaged, y'all! Every member of the elite team must be defeated. One of their agents is down. Excellent. Another agent down. That squad member has been neutralized. Another enemy defeated.
Now I'm mad.
The team are no longer a threat.